Ladies, gentlemen, and brethren, we are live across the UK. We are live across the world for this evening's Solomon Live. My name is Brodie. I have the honour and the privilege of being the Provincial Communications Officer for the distinguished province of Worcestershire and also the host of these monthly webinar of lively Freemasonry conversation. And before I begin, I just wanted to take this opportunity of thanking everybody who I spoke to in Annual Investorship just a few weeks ago, who said wonderful things about Solomon Live. Thank you very much indeed. It means the world to me and indeed the team who put this together every single month. So without any further ado, our Solomon Live this evening is meet the Assistant Grand Master, David Medlock. If you have any questions to put forward to our very special guest tonight, you can do that via our question and answer feature on Zoom. David, how the devil are you?
Good evening, Brodie. I'm very well, thank you. Tired, but well.
Well, you've had a long day in the big building today, haven't you?
I have, and London isn't my favourite place to be, but I prefer the green fields of Somerset.
Yeah, you'll always be a Somerset boy.
Afraid so.
And so, whereabouts are you at the moment? Because we need to talk about that, because you're actually in Freemasons Hall as we speak right now.
I am. I'm in the boss's private room, his lounge, where the small meetings take place, just outside the secretary's office, and it's very, very quiet here, and eerily so. So I just hope they don't lock me in.
No. But I have got a telephone number in case you need it later. I know a few people in there. So let's begin with that trusted question that we like to ask most of our guests on Solomon Live, David. Why did you become a Freemason in the first place?
Because my father told me I was going to be one.
Was it as simple as that?
My father joined Masonry in 1964, and at that time, from a lad from a council estate in Lincolnshire, it was a great honour to be asked amongst the professionals of Bath. And he joined a Saturday Lodge in 1964, and in 1977 he went through the chair, and he asked me at the beginning, would I like to join and be a candidate. I now know, after being through the chair myself, how important that was to him. And he and my uncle, who was his younger brother, were both initiated, myself in October and my uncle in November in 1977. And the lodge was St Alphege Lodge in Bath. It was number 4095. And it's the granddaughter lodge of Royal Cumberland Lodge, which is the number 41. So it's a very old lodge doing quite distinctive workings, and it was a big shock having to learn emulation.
And we've got to ask that question as well, haven't we? Because for a lot of people, when they join Freemasonry, they feel at home straight away. So I was one of those. I fell in love with it pretty much from day one. For other people, it's a bit more of a slow burn, isn't it, to get to grips with it? And we learn something every day. What was it like for you when you first joined all those years ago?
I was 22. I was probably the youngest member in the lodge. Everybody was of a similar age to my father, and it was very much looking after the youngster. I was also based in Manchester at the time. I was working in Manchester, and we travelled down to Bath to go to the meetings, and it gave me a good opportunity to get my washing done. I had both my uncle, a younger uncle, and another uncle, and a number of close friends of my father who I knew anyway in the lodge. So it wasn't a huge shock. It was very much a family.
So we've talked about why you joined. We've talked about your early experiences of becoming a Freemason. But you've touched on the place that's got a very special place in your heart, Somerset, and you were the Provincial Grand Master for Somerset. Take me through that journey, how you became the PGM for Somerset, because it is the ultimate job in Freemasonry as far as you were concerned back then.
Yes, absolutely, and still is a job I thoroughly enjoyed. We were promoted after 5 years after going through the chair in '92 to assistant director of ceremonies. It was very still much the old school of the senior management, and obviously I didn't screw that up too badly. I then was appointed to senior warden, much to the amazement of the junior warden, who was a very good emulation rich list, he didn't quite understand why my ritual wasn't quite up to standard until he came to my lodge a year or so later, and he looked at me and thought, now I understand. I then got appointed to provincial assistant Grand Master, which was a cracking job. It was probably the most enjoyable job in masonry. You have all the glamour and glitz and no real responsibility. You walked around, you've been treated like royalty, and everybody buys you a drink. So what could be better?
Oh, it's living the dream, isn't it? Living the Masonic dream right there.
Absolutely. I gave that up, and immediately I gave up. The new PGM was appointed, and I stayed on for a year with him. And then he turned around and said, would I chair the 2020 appeal for the festival? Which I did so. I was unfortunate, or fortunate, depending which way you look at it, of having cancer in 2017. And Stuart, the PGM, came to me, I think it's 2018, and said, can I put you forward as a PGM for when I hand my notice in? And I said, well, if you feel you must. It wasn't a job I was seeking, and it obviously pressed some of the right buttons. The CV was suitable, and I'd had a reasonable track record in masonry. So yeah, I was surprised. And I remember when I was assistant Grand Master, my two predecessors, I asked them up in Great Queen Street, why me? And they said, well, there isn't that big a choice, mate. And I think that's predictably true of the provincial Grand Masters, because it is a big role. And you are looking after the interests of, in our particular case, 3,000 Masons. And I thought I had it tough until I met the PGM of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and he had 6 APGMs, and that is a job and a half, that one.
Absolutely, but it's lovely to hear that story, how that came your way, and during your time in office as PGM, what were some of your favourite memories, some of your best experiences?
My new deputy, who I appointed, was very worried at one point because I didn't speak to him.
Oh.
And he was worried because he thought, what had he done wrong? And I told him that I was so confident in his handling of the job, and deputy is not an easy job. I didn't feel it necessary for me to teach somebody who did the job better than I would have ever done in a million years. And I think the biggest change I made, because I inherited a very good team from Stuart, was that I delegated to people who were better at the job than I was.
Wow, that's brilliant.
But the one thing which I did change, and I will take sole responsibility for it, is I changed the tie.
Oh, there's a few dodgy ties around, isn't there? And how did that go down?
Well, I don't think anybody's noticed. The tie we had a dragon with a mace, which, as was pointed out to me by the lieutenancy office, is a sign of power and is the emblem of the local council. So it took me 2 years to get the tie made without the mace.
Oh, well, I should imagine it was a good decision for you, sir. So you achieved greatness during your time in office. What were some of your happiest memories during that period of time as well? Some of your wonderful highlights, whether it was the events that you attended, for example.
I think the most eventful was actually giving the 50 and 60-year certificates.
Yeah.
And over the 3 years, I certainly picked up from my predecessor that doing a Q&A with the elderly gentleman who has usually been sitting quietly in the back throat and asking them the questions in front of the whole lodge was probably the best way of exploring their advice in masonry. And there's some fabulous gentlemen who I presented certificates to, and plenty more who are equally as fabulous who I didn't have the chance to give certificates to. But it is probably the biggest impression on me.
Oh, it's a wonderful thing to do, isn't it? It's a privilege, isn't it, for a provincial Grand Master to do that. Now, we'll get back to masonry in a few minutes, David, if that's okay. But let's talk about your career, because after becoming an environmental health officer, you decided to join your dad and join the family business. It sounds like we're talking about the mafia, by the way. No, we're talking about your wonderful business you did for many years. What role did you have within the business?
I started off looking after the finance, so putting money on deposit, making sure the cash flow was working, and it was really an interregnum before I found a proper job. And 40 years later, I was still at the company. So I had planned to go to America after spending 6 months in Europe, and the Laker Aircraft Company crashed, and so I never made it. And then you get married, as one does. So we were very much, the company grew. It gave my father reason to keep going, and we mainly bought companies, and there's about 36 acquisitions which we made over the period of 35 years. But our industry was changing from being very much man-based to being computer-based.
Yeah.
So a lot of those companies which were unable to invest, so size counted. And it was a great 40 years. Working with engineers is an experience which does leave its marks on you, but it does. They are dealing with people, most of which I would go for a drink with quite happily.
Well, you talked about your dad got you into Freemasonry, so your father did that. What was it like working with him within the business?
He didn't tell me anything, and I didn't tell him anything. So we had a very even relationship. He let me make all my own mistakes and learn the hard way. And as most of father's competitors said, we've all made money, but your father's actually managed to hang on to it.
That's brilliant, isn't it? And we've got to talk about work-life balance as well, because one of the things we always say in Freemasonry is family, work, other things, including Freemasonry. Being a successful businessman as you were, and the philanthropy, how did you manage to mix in Freemasonry during all of this?
It was never a huge amount of my life up until I went through the chair. I attended lodge regularly. I did what you do in your own lodge. And then once you got to the chair, we had a tradition of visiting. And over a period of about 2 years, I suppose, we visited about 90 different lodges. We just picked up a phone and asked if we could come along. We went to Paris, we went to various places all over the country. And you suddenly discovered, visiting, you discover what Masonry is about.
And how did he react to your huge success in Freemasonry?
I think he was gobsmacked. It's yeah, I think he was genuinely pleased and proud. But he was a very modest man, and he was not one who, as my mother would say, showing off was not part of the family's culture. We try to keep things at a low key, and as my father would say, if you stick your head up in the parapets, don't be surprised if it gets shot at.
I like the sound of your father. I really do, David, honestly. So we've spoke about your career. We've spoke about your journey in Freemasonry. We haven't spoke about your amazing role yet that you're doing at the moment, and that was bestowed upon you in September. But let's talk about something else you're incredibly passionate about, and that's charity. Even when you were a kid at school, you used to deliver food, didn't you? Deliver meals to the elderly. Has charity always been, as far as you're aware, important to you? Where did that come from?
From my mother. She was always doing her bit, as they say. It was in the times when if you weren't working, you're supposed to help the community. That was the community I was brought up in. My mother was an active part. She did 25 years with the Red Cross. She did the Meals on Wheels, and it seemed to be part. My sister and I both work within the charity sector in some format or other, and it's hugely rewarding. And as you go through life, you suddenly find that the things you were frightened of and didn't want to get involved in actually are quite a good experience, and you just feel you're part of something.
Yeah, it's what life's all about, isn't it? Now, whenever I do a Solomon, naturally, David, I do a lot of research on my guests I'm talking to, and I couldn't believe the success that you've had. Actually, when I was looking into this today, the Medlock Charitable Trust. First of all, remind us what that is and your involvement in that.
And my father set it up in '84, and it was very much a cash-driven. We we as an organisation were brought up in a period when tax was about 55% on corporate profits. And once Father made provision for himself and his family, then he looked at a charity to basically give back a lot of what he'd got in the past. So he started the charity up. A lot of it was in partnership with the local authority in Boston and Lincolnshire. And as you go along, you gradually get to learn what is actually an investment. And as somebody said to me once, the difference between a philanthropist and giving away money is that the person who gives away money is like giving the fish. The philanthropist gives the fishing rod. And that's what we've been trying to do for the last 35 years, is go to projects which are sustainable. It's amazing how actually what you and I think of as assets can become a liability. We did a lot of variety club buses in the early days, and they were very stringent about not giving an organisation a bus which they then couldn't manage. And we try to do the same, so that we're not putting money into employment programs without an exit policy or a way of continuing those programs. And I've probably forced it more down the lines of giving small grants, which are incredibly hard work. And I fully appreciate the work the MCF does, because handing out small grants is very time consuming and incredibly responsible, and you have to take full ownership of what you're doing. But it's very rewarding, and I wouldn't change a single part of that.
And it branches off in so many different directions. When I was looking at that earlier on, what have been some of your happiest memories with the trust, would you say, over the years? Because you've achieved some great things, from supporting homeless charities, for example, to a very personal story you spoke about earlier. Yes.
So my new grandson is had problems at birth and spent 10 days in high dependency unit, and it was a project which we'd contributed a small amount of money in 2012, which started in 2008 at Bristol Children's Hospital in St Michael's Hill, and it was where they cool babies after when they birth complications. So they found out that by cooling, it gives the brain chance to recuperate, and we made a small contribution to it in 2012, 2015. And my grandson was a beneficiary of it, which was really nice.
Oh, it's fantastic, isn't it? You've supported so many charities over the years, and isn't it wonderful to support a charity that's got a very, very special place in your heart?
It has now.
Yeah, and it always will do. So one of the things we're going to talk about as well is another huge part of your life that maybe many people joining us here this evening don't know about. And that is, you've served as High Sheriff of Somerset, Deputy Lieutenant of Somerset, Vice Lord Lieutenant as well. What do those roles involve, David? Tell me about those.
You're representing the Crown in the community. I was put forward as High Sheriff, I think mainly because I was Pro-Chancellor up at the university and had a reputation in the charity sector, and they were looking from somebody from the northeast corner of Somerset to do the job, and it was an eye-opener. It was a joy. You turn up at places and they haven't a clue what you're doing, and you just end up being treated like royalty. But it was one thing which I've learned, which is carried forward into masonry, is that one of my good friends pointed out to me that it's not you they like, it's the role they like. Which I've carried forward into my Masonic career. You've got to realize it's the office which they respect. And it's amazing how uplifting a royal visit. It's not an easy life for the royals. It is a job, and it's a pleasure. I have escorted some very, very interesting members of the royal family, and every single one of them are hardworking individuals who are doing the job because they're doing it for the population, for the country, not for themselves.
And what have been some of your? I mean, crikey, we could talk about this all night, I guess, couldn't we? But during those roles, what have been some of your happiest memories? I mean, of course, we've had the coronation recently. I'm not sure if you were involved in that in any way, no. but we've had some wonderful things to enjoy over the years. Were you involved in any of those?
Well, we're restricted to Somerset as escorts. And Yeah, I mean, uh, it is a way in which you reward people for making that extra effort, whether it be the chap who has been opening up the village hall for the last 30 years, every day, regularly looking after his community, but never getting recognized. Because of COVID, we had 20 British Empire medals to present, which the Lord Lieutenant did at Shepton Mallet. And it was humbling to see these 20 people, and they all looked at each other, and suddenly the whole atmosphere lifted because they saw what the other 19 had done to achieve it, whether it be during COVID, a lady of 98 with a long record of supporting her community through various activities. And it was genuinely humbling to see what these 20 people had done over their lifetime.
And humbling, a privilege for you to be part of that. And how does that work then, David? I mean, obviously, have you got a tenure? Do you decide to move on from those roles? How does that work?
The Shrievalty is an honorary post which lasts 12 months. Oh. So if you're not doing very well, they've only got a few 11 months left to look at it. But it does put you in a sort of positions like I was reading the lesson at Wells Cathedral, which is a very big cathedral, very grand cathedral. I stood there and I thought neither of my grandparents would have been allowed in the church at that time in their day. And you do appreciate how good this country is when it gives the opportunity to somebody from a very, very humble background, and 2 generations later, they're meeting the Queen. It is an eye-opener that becoming Deputy Lieutenant is very much, again, an extension of the Queen's, or the King's, as currently is, supporting the community. It's a bit hit and miss sometimes because a lot of the community these days don't really understand what it stands for, but there are protocols which you appreciate because there's got to be a way of doing things, and Masonry is a prime example.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I think it's clear so far that we've got to know you and a little bit about your life as well. And it's incredible what you've achieved, from your charitable work to what you achieved in those early days of Freemasonry. But we need to get right up to date now, and we need to talk about your brand new role as of September last year, Assistant Grand Master for UGLE. How did that feel, and how did you get the tap on the shoulder, the email, the phone call? How does that work?
It's one of the few times I've ever been totally gobsmacked. It was a case of blah, 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 blah. What did you say? I got the phone call, and it's been a very different life. As I said to everybody when I left Somerset as Provincial Grand Master, going to a lodge meeting in Somerset is like going out with 3,000 mates. There may be half a dozen people who I don't get on with, but I haven't met them yet. And you're now going into an arena where you have an unknown, you have rank. People have got to be nice to you. Well, most of them have got to be nice to me. But they don't actually know why they're being nice to you. And you are trying to be approachable and cover as much ground, and also make people feel that you understand the problems because you share those problems. And I think it's very much the message of today's management, that we want to make everybody, both in the provinces and in the districts, feel a part of Freemasonry.
Yeah.
And that their views count. We may not agree with them. We may have a different way of going about them, but basically we want to go all in the same direction. And we need to carry people with us.
Yeah, and that's essential, isn't it? So you were given that huge honour of assistant Grand Master. You mentioned one of those few times in your life that when you were gobsmacked by that news. What was it like when you were? What was it like when we go back to September when you were officially given that role? And I was there as well, watching you, and it was a wonderful moment. And you looked so proud, actually, which is what I would expect. What was that day like for you?
Terrifying. I've learned over the years, my father used to advise me that if you looked as if you knew what you're doing, you didn't open your mouth too often, people would assume that you did know what you were doing. And to a certain extent, you're playing a role until you actually get used to the perambulation in and coming out. But I try to make a point of smiling.
Oh, look who's just entered the room. I do believe, is that a deputy Grandmaster who's in there right now?
I know. I ought to go and make sure he's behaving himself, but I'm sure he's more than capable without me.
But was it everything you'd imagined that day?
Yes, I mean it is disconcerting in front of an audience of 18,000 people. It's a huge goldfish bowl of which suddenly you become part of the whole process. But over the years, you get to lead into that. It's not such a shock. As I said, it was actually probably more terrifying standing up in Wells Cathedral in front of basically 1,000 people you didn't know than it was standing in front of 1,800 Masons who, you know, when you meet them, we're on the same side.
Yes. And do you ever have do you ever get a pinch me moment? Because I'm Grandpa Sweevant, and I had a pinch me moment all day back in April actually. I thought, I can't believe where I am. I can't believe who I'm standing with. Do you ever have moments like that yourself? Times 10, I should imagine.
Pinch me moments. I'm more concerned about the team and letting them down. I mean, it was great when I was opening Grand Lodge for the first time. The Pursuivant, he was a little bit slow with his ritual, which was brilliant because it gave me time to think of what I should be saying next.
Hang on, a little bit slow. So do we need to be a bit fast? I'm just making a quick note here.
No. Slow and loud.
Loud.
Yeah, no, it's always, don't do it too fast, because it's like everything else. If somebody does it fast, then everybody else gets into the same route. So if you're doing your ritual, keep it slowly, very evenly paced. That's
the best advice ever, isn't it? And to anybody else who's listening as well. So, what responsibilities do you have as assistant Grandmaster? Then, perhaps you could take us through those, David.
Well, I think the strategy has been well and truly briefed and aired over the last 6 months, and now as our role is to go out, and actually the team is going to meet with the various regional committees. I've been tasked with talking to the Northwest and the Southeast. So I will be making every endeavour to basically discuss with the provincial grandmasters and the superintendents that what are the problems? How can we solve them? How can we help? How can we iron over those problems which they're finding and assist them to do the job? And it's very much a case of adjusting to today's world and planning for tomorrow's world. Yeah. So it's not complicated. It's pretty simple. It must be if I've got anything to do with it. There's no hidden agenda. What you see is what you get. The message is basically, it's your lodge, it's your future.
That's a really good point. Michael Norton, good to hear from you. Thank you for chipping in. He wants to know, in the very early stages of your role, what has been your favourite part of being assistant grandmaster? What have you enjoyed so far?
Well, the committee meetings I could well avoid. I've been going to install new provincial grandmasters, which have been hugely, it's been a great honour. I mean, some of the provincial grandmasters, bearing in mind, I know exactly how they feel, and they're now coming into a role which I don't many of them ever expected, and it's great meeting them. I've been incredibly impressed with the Director of Ceremonies team. Every single one of them has been to meetings, and the membership have felt proud and encouraged by our DCs. It is an amazing part of our ritual that, actual fact, if you do it smartly and slowly and correctly, everybody goes away thinking, oh, they've seen something.
Yes.
So it's moments like that when people realize that we are here to help. We're not here just to be adored and praised for something which we haven't really done.
That's a very good point. And Nigel, hello, Nigel. He said, what is David's level of involvement in Masonic orders? Because I think it's a foregone conclusion you'll be involved in some other things within Freemasonry as well.
I'm a member of a Royal Arch chapter. I'm a member of a Mark Lodge. The other side degrees I've never had time to indulge in. One of the things I did find as a provincial Grand Master is how separate we all are. And how much we should be bringing together. If you're looking at the university scheme, for instance, which is an example of bringing young men into Masonry, then there are a certain degree and percentage of our membership who want to explore the origins of what we do.
Yes.
And if that means joining other orders and progressing in their Masonic careers, it's briefing themselves and making more of what Masonry can offer. So I passionately believe this message of Royal Arch as being part of craft masonry is absolutely the correct way to go.
No, couldn't agree more. And the illustrious Freemason behind would totally agree with that as well. He's photobombing us once again, and we're absolutely delighted. So let's talk about our 7-year strategy. And your involvement in that. You've spoken briefly about this already, because this is essential to Freemasonry, isn't it, as we move forward, the 7-year strategy?
Yes, we have to adapt. I don't think we have to change. I think we have to adapt. We have certain ways of doing things which are based on a different world. Communications like this is something new. But it's very much a case of that's how the modern man lives. Listening to podcasts on their iPhones is part of the modern world, and we have to change with it. And if we don't try, we'll never know whether it works or whether it doesn't work. The strategy is very simple: is that we as Masons have to take responsibility for the future of our craft. And it's nothing more complicated. I harken back to the days when I became Provincial Grand Master, and I read a book on the Provincial Grand Masters previous to my appointment, and we were one of the first provinces which had a Provincial Grand Master. A chap called Dunkley came round, and I think Hampshire was first, and you suddenly realise that the Provincial Grand Master is there as a filter. He's there to stop arguments progressing. He's there to block things and support their own local lodges before they get up to London. You're there to help people. You're not there to instruct and tell people what they should and shouldn't do. You're there to support them. And it's very much a case of implementing a simple strategy and keeping people enthused that they might be doing things right.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it, David? It's as I mentioned a few times when we've spoken about this, it's almost a no-brainer, isn't it, what we're doing with the 7-year strategy. And Gordon would like to know, what more can we do to encourage more Masons, Master Masons, to join the Royal Arch? As we're saying, we're all one, and of course that's a really important thing we're talking about at the moment, isn't it? That insoluble link.
Don't give up. I mean, it is a case of looking at Masonry as a whole. Many of our new members don't necessarily have the time, but when they do have the time, then give them something which is interesting, give them something which will attract them, give them something which, once they're attracted, they'll stay. And we do need to feel a part of something. It's part of our human nature, and there are there's a lot of competition for people to enjoy, whether they're sport, whether it be their. Now you can do everything online. It gives you even another facet. So Masonry's got to compete with all those interesting things and create something which is of worth and of value.
And we know about your experience working with universities and what you've offered them in the past as well. How important would you say are university schemes in the 7-year strategy?
I can't you can't expect it. They are so important. I mean, these are young, bright individuals, and we have to convince them that masonry is a good thing. We've had my own lodge has been a university lodge, things like forever, and we have seen candidates go through, develop and move on. That's the nature of graduates. They do tend to move on. They are bright, clever, intelligent, and they find something in masonry which obviously appeals. And we need to encourage that. And God forbid we should lose anyone due to the fact is we've been too lazy to pick up on their needs when they move back to a different part of the community.
That's a really good point, And a few more questions because they're coming in thick and fast, as we would imagine when we are speaking to the assistant Grand Master. What advice would you give to a young Mason who's just starting their journey in Freemasonry? Because we have people joining us this evening who are experienced Masons, those who have just joined, and perhaps those who haven't yet joined our fraternity. But what would you say to Robert there, David?
I would suggest that one should visit as much as one can without becoming a professional knife and fork mason. I think you need to experience masonry in different forms and seeing how it's carried out elsewhere. When I go around Somerset, I obviously meet a lot of Dorset, Wiltshire, even Bristol Masons, occasionally a few Devonians, and I just thank them for doing missionary work in Somerset. It's the joy of masonry, is the differences which we see, which makes us appreciate our own. And visiting is the lifeblood. I have that picture in my mind of the troops in the old empire going around various parts of the empire and Masonic meetings in far distant lands where you're meeting together with other brothers who think and feel the same way and enjoying their company. The ritual is just part of that.
No, so it's a really good point. And actually, we've kind of touched on this already. We all get our different things out of Freemasonry, don't we? And that's the important thing. It means something different to everybody, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean there's still a lot of people out there who love doing ritual because they like performing. To me, it makes my blood run cold and I'm very sweaty, but there's some people who absolutely adore it. There's others who you can see actually grow as they do ritual because they're so sure that they can't do it. When they have done it, they grow as individuals. And certainly, I think it's given me confidence in my career, and it's also made me perfectly comfortable talking to all ranks, from the boss, the royal family, to the dustman and the grafters on the street. Everybody's got a story. I mean, if you look at a homeless man or woman and talk to them when they're able to have a conversation, they've all got a life story.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing I enjoy, and I know you've spoken about this in the past as well, you will meet people in Freemasonry that you would never meet in any walk of life. And that's one of the most wonderful things about our fraternity. David, I cannot believe how quickly the last 40 minutes has gone. It really has gone in the blink of an eye. Couple of questions before we say goodnight, and potentially wherever you're living in the UK, go out into the sunshine. What are you most looking forward to during your time as assistant Grand Master? What are you really looking forward to achieving or just experiencing?
I would like to see people looking forwards, not backwards. I would like to. I'd like to tear down some of those prejudices which other organisations have about Freemasonry. I mean, I find it ironic that the one most inclusive organisation in the country is actually criticised for things which I don't even understand. Masonry is a hugely opening and welcoming organisation, and it should be appreciated as such. But if you look at it, we do tend as a nation to look for faults rather than for strengths, and I would love to change that wherever we go. that people see that we are a force for good, and that Masons are generally, on balance, everyone I've met has been a good person.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more once again. What does Freemasonry mean to you, David, before we call it a night? What does Freemasonry mean to you? Out of all the years that you've been experiencing Freemasonry in the high office that you've achieved, what does it mean to you?
It keeps me grounded. If I can't go up and speak to a person on the street who's a Mason who I probably never met before, then my life is poorer. The fact that I can speak to my fellow brethren means that my life is richer.
And that is a wonderful way of finishing our conversation. David, I've loved talking to you. And the best thing about tonight, I've learned so much about you as well. And I know those joining us this evening will feel exactly the same. David, sir, have you enjoyed your Solomon Live experience?
I'll enjoy it when I get home and have a drink.
But you get to watch it a little bit later on if you want. David, we can't thank you enough for joining us here this evening, and have a wonderful evening, because we know you're about to leave the big building now, aren't you?
I am indeed. Thank you very much. Nice to see you again, Brody.
Been great to see you. And ladies and gentlemen and brethren, our next Solomon Live will be on Tuesday, the 13th of June, where our topic will be Freemasonry and the suffragettes. We'll be meeting author, editor, researcher and Freemason Philippa Lee, and discussing the role that Freemasonry has historically played in advancing women's suffrage. So that's Tuesday, the 13th of June at 7:30. Please be there for what will be a very educational conversation. And if you haven't done so already, please register for Solomon. You'll find us in the regular place, solomon.ugle.org.uk, full of essential and fantastic content for your daily advancement in Masonic knowledge. Until then, thank you for joining us here this evening, and we'll see you back here very, very soon. Good night, everybody.